So Simon, thanks for joining us today at ADAPT's CCD Edge here in Sydney. And I hope you're having a great day. And of course, fantastic. So today's theme is optimizing sustainable and resilient technology with effective FinOps. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
But what does that theme mean to you?
You know, it's really interesting and somewhat topical in that at Aurecon, just today really, we're launching a new brand campaign, and the theme of it is around balance. And it's the balance between leaders having to run businesses that are enduring, so are profitable and last into the long run, work for all their stakeholders, including their customers and staff, but also that they're achieving sustainability targets. And not just targets, but running the business in a way that is expected now of all our stakeholders, including government and society, that it's a business that's positive and contributing to society. So the thing that, you know, I've reflected on when attending today and listening to some of the presentations is the tension between more data moving to the cloud, the impact on carbon intensity of that. So it can save, as we heard this morning, you can reduce your carbon intensity by moving data to the cloud. There's another tension there in that there's still very large amounts of data being generated, and we don't really see a slowdown in that. And in terms of the things that we're finding on the projects we're working on, we're seeing an increasing focus by clients and their end customers. When I say clients, I mean cloud providers and data center co-location providers, focusing on sustainability right the way through the whole asset. So thinking about embodied carbon in the asset, in the buildings and so on, but also, of course, with energy. And interesting to see this morning a number of organizations talking about having 100% renewable energy by various dates. And so I think for me, the theme, right, connects with, you know, topically our theme around balance that we're seeing with our leaders and our clients at the moment, that tension that we see.
So that balance, I think, when we think about it, is not just being efficient, doing things well, but actually being effective, doing the right things. And so coming back to that conversation around balance, it's not just sustaining our business models, it's then also doing those things in a sustainable way, which has economic benefits, as you were talking about there before. And so coming down now to that data piece as well and being effective with it. So as you were saying, there's an explosion of data coming through and we're having to run those things through our data centers, but we don't necessarily have the information in our hands that's going to help decision makers drive discussions and ultimately lead to outcomes as well. When you're thinking about getting the right data, how do you approach framing that conversation in the right way?
It's easy in business to collect lots of data. And when planning and starting to collect information, we often, the thing that comes to mind is we often work with clients around digital twins or effectively digital copies of their assets to help them run their business better. And it can feel like there's a zero cost impact of adding an extra field. It might be useful, right? Let's just gather that little piece of data. But there's, you know, as we heard this morning, there's a sort of an incurred debt. So every time you collect that piece of data, it has to be stored and replicated. And then over time, it's stored for a long period of time. And then people in our business or other businesses then need to validate it, check it, look at it later. And so I think it's really important to be judicious or careful about in business when we're collecting data that it's actually something that we can make a decision upon. So it's not just interesting or, you know, for the sake of analysis, that we can use that data to make a decision. So when I work with our teams, I definitely encourage that before we start collecting a bunch of information, Are we going to make a decision on that? What happens if it changes? Does that affect us or not? And if it doesn't, then let's not collect it yet, right?
So really, it's being selective, it's being decisive. It's saying, okay, we could, because we have the capability through IoT, through digital twins, through API layers, all these kind of things, widgets and wizardry and that kind of thing. We could, but should we?
Yeah.
Because if we're collecting all this data, it's weighing down our infrastructure layer, our architecture layer, and ultimately it's giving fatigue to the people who are making decisions, having to navigate through. As you try and drive these conversations, what are some of the tips that you can share to help bring other stakeholders along this journey with you?
I think a practical one is to have a bit like when you're running a business, say, for example, you would have a cost focus. So when somebody says, let's just do this course of action, there's a cost associated with it, and there's a natural tendency to go, well, actually, that has a cost, so let's think about whether that's sensible or not. I think when we're thinking about data, it's not cost-free. And so having that as a mentality around, okay, well, it's not just $1, like a price cost, but there's a time cost in our business that translates to cost eventually, I guess. But being aware that when we start to make decisions that have data implications, then we should be aware that it has a time and dollar cost associated with it, and to treat it like that. Yeah.
So with all of these things, what I'm hearing is that as we try and make some of these value-based decisions around data, around becoming more resilient, but particularly about becoming more sustainable as well, it's shifting those conversations left. Obviously that comes from that quality engineering space, DevOps and the like. And it gets a bad rap sometimes. It's often seen as a technical kind of thing. But as we shift some of these decisions left, we get more visibility earlier in the phase, so from executives and on down, to then have a better framework for actually how we drive value across the value chain in infrastructure, across the organization, but out to our ecosystems as well. As you think about that topic of value and focusing it on in a sustainable way, what have been some of the challenges to approaching that?
The first thing that comes to mind, right, is the pace of development of all of the digital infrastructure that we're seeing. It's very fast. And to be more sustainable, or to have any element brought into the design and the construction of infrastructure, requires some planning and consideration. And so there's a tension between let's build it as fast as we can, compared to let's design the perfect, most effective, to use your word from earlier, and sustainable outcome. And I think the primary challenge is the pace, because that has been driven by all of us with our phones and our computers and all the IoT devices we have. We're producing more and more data, and the infrastructure to accommodate all of it and also keep it all redundant so it's available 24/7 requires a lot of investment and time and focus. And right around the industry, as we look at different cloud providers and colocation providers, we find that there's a lot of competition for having capacity available. So I think that is a challenge. But on the other side, we do have targets. Across the industry, businesses have set targets and they're planning towards that. So I think that's a consideration as well, which is going into the longer term planning and deployment of the infrastructure.